Today we have Matt from Unit Sydney to discuss with me at the Artist Hustle the importance of fitness in the performing arts. Matt, welcome.
Thank you for having me.
Oh, well, it's great to have you here.
It's great to be here in my gym.
Oh yeah, good. We actually go back a long way.
We do.
And the reason why we've connected is because you have a real history in regards to musical theatre. If you just want to quickly share with everybody.
Yeah, so many moons ago, when Pat and I first met, I was doing musical theatre. Jersey Boys was the show quite a while ago. Mm-hmm. And during that time, I was still very much in my fitness and personal training, and then realised that there was still an element of performing arts to a gym group class environment. So I made this switch from a full-time actor into a full-time PT.
Yeah, and you had a really big career also on the West End. So not only were you working in Australia, but you were working in the UK. So you got to see two different areas of how artists over there maintain themselves, or the sort of regimen they had, because it's a different industry over there.
Absolutely. Yeah.
So is there anything that stood out for you in terms of the difference between Australian artists and those that work in the UK?
I think in the UK there's a lot more work, and the availability of jobs is easier because there's a lot more shows going on in the West End, whereas in Australia, because there's not as many MT shows going on, when there are shows going on, you have to work pretty hard to land audition, and then to keep the role you have to work, I think, a little bit harder than people in the UK, because there is such a lot more work to be done. So I think Australians have a little bit better work ethic because they have to work harder to get the gig, whereas in the UK, not saying you don't work hard, but there's more opportunities for work in the UK.
So I guess in a way it keeps their regimen going because they know that they've got auditions coming up pretty soon.
It's a never-ending process. You always have to be on point or show fit, because you never know when your show's going to stop, you'll audition and you'll start again in the next 2 months. Yeah,
whereas I feel like over here it seems to be the way that when a musical is auditioning, that they all sort of happen at the same time. And then you've got nothing for a long time to work towards.
Yeah, so you're preparing for the audition, and then, say for example, if you don't get the audition, then what do you do for the next 2, 3, 4, 6 months?
Yeah.
It's in the UK, you have to be on a certain level, show fit, where you're recovering, your strength, your conditioning, your mobility, and your recovery has to be on point 365, whereas in Australia it's a little harder to maintain that because you don't know when the next gig's going to come.
And I suppose too, seasonally, we get it pretty good here, whereas in the UK when it's cold, it's cold.
Yes, it is.
So how do you keep yourself going in those time frames?
It's understanding why you're doing it. Is it for the job or is it for your career? It's like anything. If you have a job, you have to do a certain amount of things every day to maintain your 5-day week or 6-day week. And it's the same with performing arts. You have to wake up at a certain time, eat the right amount of foods, sleep, train, steam, foam roll, all the stuff you have to do to maintain your fitness and your show fitness. But a consistency with the weather is that it doesn't really matter. People just adapt to the weather. If you have a gym to go to inside, awesome. If you want to train outside, you kind of deal with it, I guess.
In the rain?
In the rain.
Ooh, that's tough. I don't know if I could do that.
Well, when you move there, you'll find out. Next year.
I'm pretty happy about that. All right, well, let's break it down into 3 sections, because we discussed this before we started recording, and I thought it'd be a really good way to sort of break it up. So the first thing is the fitness regime when you actually have the gig. But I want to go back 2 steps, because the one before that is the preparation around getting yourself into that audition and the fitness that's required around that. But let's go even a step before that. And when you're not auditioning, what does that fitness regimen look like, so that when you do get to 2 and 3, you're not in shock mode?
Well, you're ready.
Yeah,
you're ready to go.
And I think a lot of people forget step 1.
Yeah, for sure.
They kind of just keep going with life, and then the thing happens, and then the week before they're like, oh no, I've got to go and work on my legs, I've got to work on my strength, and one class isn't going to cut it before the audition.
That's true. It's finding a routine for you that works, because people will have a job before their main audition, so depending on what your schedule is. But if you are not physically fit, and I mean, resilience training, a bit of strength training, so your muscles can adapt and you have strong bone to lift things, if you can't do that now, if you're not doing it in 6 months, 12 months, 10 years down the track, things get a lot harder. So if you want to do this for a long period of time, your strength has to be as consistent as eating breakfast. This is one of those things you have to do week in, week out. It's like consistency. It's like learning a song or learning how to sing. Once you've learned how to sing, it's the same as strength training. You've learned how to strength train, and it's just maintaining that skill set forever.
Because I think sometimes the perception, especially for dancers, is I go and do a dance class, therefore that's enough.
Yeah.
But what we've come to learn is, especially for me, having a dance background, is that you don't really understand your body. You kind of just go through the motions, but when you go and train and you're working on your strength, you actually start to focus on particular muscle groups and go, oh, if I just activate this part, I can actually push better in order for my turns to be stronger. Or the fact that my arms do feel strong, I can hit
certain movements
certain
better.
accents much stronger.
I think for blokes as well, if you're a male dancer, you have to be able to pick up, females. And if you're not strong to do that, you don't have the bone density or the muscle mass to do so, your job gets really hard. And if you're in the audition process, and you go, I'll work towards the audition, and when you get there, you're not in a physically fit state, they go, oh, that guy's not fit enough to do this. I'm sure if you get there, but if the guy next to you has been training for 3-6 months before you and he's ready to go, the chances are he's going to get the gig and you're not.
Yeah.
So you've got to be, I guess, on it the entire time.
Yes. And I suppose it is that thing, unfortunately, that you walk into an audition, that they are seeing you as an overall package.
Yes.
And they're seeing the look that you bring to the table. Yes, you may have 6 to 8 weeks to rehearse, but in saying that, will you actually have the time to put that into practice as well as jumping into a new show? Like if you have that system in place, if that's always been part of my thing, you will keep that up.
What's the benefits, not just for now, but as I said before, about 10 years down the line, if you are consistently doing your dance classes, you know how to deadlift, you know how to squat, you can pull your body weight up with a push-up or a pull-up, those kind of skill sets will not only impact your audition process, getting an audition, but then once you have the gig, you don't have to work as hard because you're already 60% of the way there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So let's talk about when you're not auditioning. What are some things that you can start to think about, or like for someone who, let's say an actor, they're not really using their body much.
Yeah.
And there might be a fear about going into the gym and starting strength. Maybe there's a perception that they think they're going to bulk up and get huge. Let's just break down some of those myths.
To bulk up, I have this question probably every day, Kat. Every day I get this question, is most females don't want to get too bulky. And that's almost physically impossible unless you're in a huge calorie surplus, which means eat more calories than you're burning. And to be honest, most females don't do that. So if you're worried about getting bulky, that's the least of your worries. The main priority for you is to move well now so you can move well when you're 70. That's what we want to focus on in a strength regime. So when you're not in your audition process, there has to be a level of fitness and a little level of strength. So your hips don't get tight, your knees don't get tight, your shoulders have good posture. All these things from now when you're, say, 35 until you're 30, 39, 40, 45, 50, they all stay the same. So your muscles are in a really good place. So when you do have to start training again for that gig, you're not in a world of pain, things get a bit easier.
And if I was stepping to the gym for the first time, what sorts of things would you sort of introduce me to get me into that mindset of, oh, I can do this and I have something to work towards, as opposed to just lifting the heaviest thing, getting a shock to the body, so much so that it almost scares you from coming back?
Think about it as a functionality purpose. I go, for example, the deadlift. The deadlift is one of the most functional things you can do because everyone picks something up off the ground, and more often than not, people do it properly so they don't hurt their back. And it's the same thing as walking up the stairs. You need to have strong legs to walk upstairs, to pick up your bags, everything that's functionally fit, stuff that you do on a day-to-day basis. That is the most important part of things. Your squats, your deads, your bends, your rows, your twists, your lunges. 5 things you do most days without even knowing that you're doing it is how you start strength training. If you have aesthetics goals, then you can add a bit more into that. But functionality, that's the most important part.
Yeah.
So rather than going, got to lift heavy, you have to know what muscles you're actually using. So if I'm using a squat, I'm working my quads and my glutes. If I'm doing a deadlift, I'm using my glutes and my hamstrings. A bench press is knowing the muscle groups is how we're going to get stronger, rather than going, I have no idea what I'm doing. If you understand how it feels, then you'll know why you're doing it.
Yeah, and I think that is so important when you are stepping into any sort of skill, new skill, that you don't do things just because you get told to do them. It's like once you start to break down what each thing means, why you're doing it, the purpose, then your focus will be so much more aware of your body and how you can execute it through character, how you can execute through dance.
But it's also injury prevention.
Yeah.
So the stronger you are, the less chances the injuries happen. And I'm sure you know and I both know that injuries definitely happen.
Yes.
So if the stronger you are, the less chances of injuries are going to happen. And that's the main purpose, is to be functionally fit so you're injury free and can maintain a level of fitness.
Yeah, because especially going back to dancers, a lot of them are hypermobile.
Absolutely,
And there's a huge risk in that area. If you don't have the strength, you will just get injured.
Well, it's the twisting of the knee and the lower back positions and the shoulders that if you don't have, you're correct. Most dancers are mobile, but if you're able to support yourself physically, you're able to hold a plank, do a push-up, then those muscles that you need to pick up that person or do a lunge or do I'm not a dancer, I don't know the terms, but jumpy stuff, then you're able to land easier and safely as well.
Yeah. So we've talked about strength. Let's move into some cardio. So I think something that really shocks performers is, and yes, you'll speak about this in a moment, is the fact that when you're in the audition space, everything starts to get a bit stressy.
Oh, yeah.
Your heart rate starts to increase, you feel all the feels, all of a sudden you're losing your breath, you get taught choreography, and you start panting heavily.
Oh yeah, the adrenaline's pumping.
Yeah, and then all of a sudden you're like, oh, my cardio's really bad.
I think I say it a lot in class, it's getting comfortable with being uncomfortable. And if you're in that process and you're doing these auditions and cardiovascular tests, and your heart rate is elevated, it's going to happen, because when you're doing a show, of course your heart rate's going to get elevated, but it's understanding how to control the heart rate and bring it back down, because the next scene you have to do a dialogue or some vocals. So understanding here in this group environment, when you're doing conditioning pieces, you're not conditioning for 45 minutes straight. You're not dancing for 45 minutes straight. So there's blocks here, you stop, you breathe in a few times and you go again. You understand how to bring your heart rate down when you can, and it's the same with singing as well. Like you learn how to push that part but then bring it back, because the next part I have to work a bit harder. So it's understanding how your body feels and how it kind of meets in the middle to last the entire audition process or the show.
So if I was to come into the gym and I really want to work on that sort of training where you're sort of on really hard and then you're off for a little bit, I suppose in my mind I'm like, okay, in a dance class, for example, you go in, you do some warm-ups, then you start to learn some combinations.
Yeah.
So there's periods of when you're on and then you relax, and then you're on and then you relax. In the audition room, you're on most of the time mentally and physically. And then sometimes when you do break up into groups, that you will do it once and then you'll swap lines and then you'll do it again.
Yeah.
So it is that thing of like cardio.
Yeah.
So what kind of workout or training do I need to think about if I want to work myself towards that?
Well, it's bringing the heart rate up for your anaerobic, which is short, sharp bursts, and your ATPPC. And there's three systems, so anaerobic, aerobic, ATPPC, and most dancers will be using...
What's that mean?
So
ATPPC.
ATPPC is short, sharp bursts, only the one. Anaerobic is kind of maximum 10 seconds, and then aerobic is longer periods of time. So most dancers, slightly aerobic, but mostly anaerobic because you're doing it a lot. So any sort of HIIT classes or conditioning classes where you're moving for a certain period of time, rest, and then do something else for a certain period of time, and then go back to it, and mixing that with strength, such as machines with bikes, burpees, box jumps, is doing, say, 15, 30, 45 seconds of that position. You might rest for 10 seconds and then go and do something else, and you go back and do it again. And obviously, if you're counting your reps or knowing what the screen says, you know how hard it takes to work, or sorry, how long it takes to work at a certain level. Just practice. If you do it again and again and again, you're not going to be out of shape, because let's say, for example, 30 seconds on the bike and I'm going to burn 15 calories. In 2 weeks' time, I do it again, I burn 17 calories. In 2 weeks' time, I do 20 calories. So that consistency, so stop, start, that is a dancer's life, I guess. Again, I'm not a dancer, so I'm just guessing.
But you've certainly worked with a lot of dancers in this space.
Rhythmically move, I guess, is what I call it.
Your business is how old right now?
We are 14 months old.
14 months old.
Yeah.
And you have created a space where actually a lot of performing artists do come here and train.
Yeah.
So the fact that you do have that advantage of being a performer yourself, that is such a great thing to bring in, because a lot of dancers or people who work in the arts, sometimes they're working with people who just don't get it.
Yeah.
And by having somebody who does get it, it's like, okay, now I specifically can give you more detail in how to do things because I understand that field much more.
I think most performers who would come in, and from my experience when I was singing a lot more full-time professionally, was that any overhead movements where you are tensing your neck, and if you're in a musical theatre show, that your larynx and all your neck muscles, they can't be tight, they've got to be loose. If you're doing any overhead pressing, it puts tension on the neck. So any sort of movements that I say, you don't need to do that, there's always 1,000 other exercises you can do. It's knowing what your body needs to do to get through that movement, so you're not ruining the main purpose of your job. So if your main purpose is to sing, then at all aspects you have to look after your voice.
That's right.
And if your main aspect is to dance, then at all costs, whatever you have to do to look after your body to keep it strong, that's your job as well.
Yeah, so the training that would be leading up to an audition, if I was a singer, I would have to almost adapt a little bit.
Adapt accordingly, yeah. If you know that singing is your main gig and you know that I don't really strength train that much, but I enjoy cardio and I like it, how it opens up my rib cage and I can breathe better, then awesome, do that. But if you want to look a certain way and be strong in that position and be strong for, again, 7 years later, and if you're doing a physical role where you're moving props and picking up stuff and picking up people, then you have to be strong to do that, but also fit to do your dancing, but also be able to do all these things, something called the triple threat, 3 things to do well.
So as a singer, say, for example, if I have been doing some strength training for the past couple of months, and I realise there's a show coming up, I want to audition for it, and going back to the modification thing, that would I almost back off anything around here
I would,
relax muscles to prepare me for the audition.
But then again, everyone's different. I know some people have no issue overhead pressing or tension in the neck, but for me, when I was doing it, I said any overhead press stuff I just would not do to release the tension in the traps in the neck. But if you know that, or if you're an experienced person, you don't need to adapt anything, but there's always a regression. And if you're doing a class or doing a fitness and they say, this is the program, don't change it, you're probably the wrong gym. So anything can be modified and regressed to make sure that you're comfortable doing it. So if you're in a show and you're singing full time, your voice gets tired. Like I've lost my voice many a time, but
I remember.
I wish I knew what I knew now 10 years ago.
Yeah, of course. And that's the thing, the difference between the inexperienced performer and the experienced performer is if you want to become experienced in these areas, you can't go at this alone. Like you actually need to bring on a team to help get you to where you need to get to.
Yeah.
And you can't just assume that you're going to get the gig on the basis of not having experience in all areas. Yeah. And I think this area is so untapped and kind of like, oh, I don't really need it because I already dance.
Yeah, I'm fit enough, I'll be fine.
I'm fit enough, I'll be fine. There's no gigs coming up anyway, so why do I bother?
Yeah, what am I working towards?
Yeah, and I think you said this really, we've spoken about this before, but you have to train professionally in order to be the professional you want to be.
Is this my profession? What am I doing? As I said before, is this a job? Am I working for just the job, or am I working for the career of doing this?
Yeah.
So if I'm a dancer, I'm 18, am I going to be dancing until I'm 35? Well, you can if you're physically fit and looking after yourself. Am I a singer and I want to sing from 18 to 45? Well, you can if you look after yourself.
Or beyond 45.
47.
107. Yeah, that's right. You need to think about the long term.
Absolutely.
And I think especially going back to dancers again, that there is that mindset of just wanting to push and go hard as fast. Don't worry about the consequences. Smash the knees.
Yeah.
Do all the floor work. Don't think about injury prevention or any sort of strength training to help support the knee.
Yeah, but I think that's what it is. It's injury prevention. So when I was doing the show, I would have, I'm sure you did have the same thing where you're in a daily routine. I'd work up a certain time, and my breakfast was this, and I did certain things, my shoulders, and then I went for a run, or I went for a steam, or I went for a swim. I had a daily massage, I did my yoga class. Once you found that your daily routine, your preparation, that preparation becomes injury prevention. Because if you don't do a certain thing at the end of a show or before bed, and you go, I didn't do that, and then the next day, my knee really hurts. It's because you weren't doing the same things you're doing. So injury prevention, at a point where you're gigging, even not gigging, and in the show, that has to be main priority. Injury prevention, because your job essentially is to be on stage.
Yeah.
And if you're injured, you're not doing your job.
And that's a good segue into when you do have the gig and you're doing it 8 times a week and you're using the same muscle groups on stage 8 times a week. There is that sense of like you have to counterbalance that outside of the show.
Yes.
Because if you don't, then you're going to strain, potentially tear something, because you're just always using this same muscle group, but you're not doing stretching, or you're not focusing on injury prevention. Absolutely. You're not going to rehab. Like, you have to do that so that you can be on stage 8 times a week.
Well, your contract says you're supposed to be on stage 8 times a week. And yes, we all have injuries and sick, but your main purpose is to be on. And to do that job, you have to look after yourself. And that is, I might have to pay my own money to get a massage once a week. I have to go get a singing lesson or vocal massage. I have to go to a nutritionist to look after my body. That is part of your responsibility as a performer, to look after yourself. Yeah.
And I remember doing Jersey Boys. Part of the things that I was doing outside of the show was I was working on using different parts of my voice, for example, because I was always using a certain area of my voice on stage. So I would counterbalance that by doing legit classical training, for example. Or with my body, I was making sure that I was getting physio and getting a massage. Doing strength training, because I was always using certain muscles, parts of my shoulders or my back. I was always pushing props on stage, you know. So I can't just rely on this sort of strength. I need to work on strengthening it and making it stronger.
Well, a lot of injuries, as you said, come from, the repetitive strain. So knee, back and hips doing the same moves and then not actually looking after it other ways. But as I said previously, the stronger you are and the more centered you are, so one leg's not working more than the other, you're doing deadlifts and functional movements where more than one thing are working, so everything's working together. The chance of injuring yourself because you're strong equally down the plane, or whatever it is, it's a lot less chance of injury because you are stronger than you were before.
Yeah.
So when I did the show in the West End, there was a position where I was laying on a bed for the gag, the comedy piece, and I was sitting on like a one-handed position for, it would have been like 2 minutes. But over 6 months, my shoulder was just absolutely killing me because I wasn't doing anything else on my other shoulder. I'm just focusing on this. So it takes practice to know, well, I'm doing this again and again and again. But if I did this every other day, I wouldn't be in that position as I was. But the reason why we have physios and masseuses and yoga teachers is to use them as part of, injury prevention is top priority.
And I'm so glad you said that, because it's so easy to kind of ignore a little thing like that in the show. You're like, I'm just resting my arm here for 2 minutes.
Oh, it's painful, but I'll do it because I've been paid to do it, so I'm going to do that position and go, why is that so small? Yeah,
and then you're like, but I'm just doing this.
It's so simple. Yeah.
It's so simple. So why does that happen, do you think?
What do you mean?
Like, why would I get this niggle if it's something so simple?
Oh, because you haven't trained another muscle to counterbalance that position. So it could be a weakness in the core, stability of the shoulder structures. It's just something you haven't done in your normal routine that would be out of the ordinary.
And then some days you are more tired than other days.
Not every day is going to be amazing, guys. Not every day is going to be amazing.
Because we're just human beings.
We're human beings. Give yourself a break, bro.
Cool. So we've tackled when you're not performing, when you're not auditioning,
Yep.
the importance of getting some sort of system in place so that when you do get into the audition, it's not going to be a shock to the body. Your cardio's feeling really good, really comfortable. Again, you're not in shock because of all the things that's happening.
You're at a good level.
You're grounded because you feel strong in your body. You don't feel like you're having an out-of-body experience, which can happen.
Yeah.
But then we've also spoken about when you're in a show and making sure that you are still keeping up that regimen, that training. Injury prevention is so important, but also recovery, which we'll get to in another video.
Yep.
Is there anything else we haven't spoken about?
I guess it's nutrition as well. So it's all well and good to look after your body with strength training and injury prevention, but if you're not looking after yourself looking after yourself in a nutritional factor, so your calories are the right amount of calories for you whilst you're training, you get to a Sunday and you've been in a deficit for 6 days. By the time Sunday comes, you have a 2 shot on Sunday, you're exhausted and you wonder, why am I so tired? It's because you haven't fueled your week. So in a daily normal day, someone might burn 3,000 calories just living and doing normal breathing. But if you're only eating 2,000 calories a day over 6 days, you're going to be exhausted by Sunday. Yeah. So it's understanding what your nutritional needs to get through that week so you can do your job and not feel tired. Because when you're working so hard and your calories are so low, your immune system takes a bit of a hit, and your job again is to be 100% the entire time.
Yeah.
So fueling your week and knowing how many grams of protein, fats, carbs is super important for recovery, strength gains, and just general energy levels.
Yeah, and we'll talk about that again in another video, which is awesome. But let's leave it for now.
Cool.
Because I think we've got some really good stuff to tap into.
Lots to talk about.
The next series of videos that are coming up. But for the meantime, thank you, Matt.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you everyone for watching. I hope you have gained some really good insight. And of course, if you're in Sydney,
we are at 112 McAvoy Street, Alexandria, Strength and Conditioning Studio.
And please let Matt know how you found this place, because if you are a performer, there's such a great advantage to having him on board, because he just gets it, and you need someone that gets it and can be very specific and helpful in that way.
That's nice. Thanks.
All right, we'll see you later. Thank you so much for watching.